The Woman in the Ice, written by MellonTheFelon. It was a Tuesday when I first saw The Woman in the Ice. Not a special Tuesday, not particularly interesting or noteworthy. I woke at 5 to the grating din of my phone's alarm, and I pawed at it sleepily. Eventually, the shrill screech, which must have been designed specifically to irritate human auditory sensibilities, fell silent. After repeating the grim process several times, I finally managed to pry my eyes open and was rewarded with the dull gray of my bedroom wall. I had bothered neither to paint nor decorate it, preferring to leave it as bare, unadorned, and lifeless as possible. We, that way, shared a kindred spirit. Groaning, I reached for my glasses on the table next to me, and I lifted them onto my face, resolving my vision into a disappointing clarity. Alaska is a dull place in the winter, and even inside the shelter of my house, there was always a vague sense of ossification in the air. The world felt slow. My room was Spartan, I'll admit, much more so than it should have been after 3 weeks of living there. But I didn't need much in the way of furniture, aside from a bed in which to sleep and a table on which to eat. Truth be told, there were days when I forewent the latter and ate in the former. As a result, crumbs had begun to accumulate on the bedspread, and ants were becoming a serious problem. I had set out traps, but they didn't seem to be very effective. With a sigh and the dexterity of an octogenarian, I stumbled out of my room and began my morning routine. First, dry cereal. No milk that day. I would have to remember to pick some up. I ate it in front of the small TV in the front room. It would have probably been better to simply move my table in front of the TV, but that felt like giving up for some reason that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Meals and the TV should be separate. It felt wrong. So I forced myself to sit on the floor if I wanted to eat in front of the TV. Next, I showered and brushed my teeth. Doing both simultaneously is supposed to be good for the environment. It saves water. Finally, I dressed and I took a moment to run my finger over the sole picture on my wall. Lucy's, my ex. After she broke up with me, I moved here, as far away from Florida as possible. Not a day went by that something didn't remind me of her. A stranger's smile, an ad for a TV show that she liked, etc., etc. This was not the first breakup that I had endured, nor should it have been the most upsetting. Once, a girl had broken up with me during Thanksgiving dinner with my family. As if Thanksgiving dinner isn't always awkward enough. But that felt final to me. There was a definite sense of closure. Lucy's breakup had been confusing. She had given very little in the way of explanation, offering only the unhelpful words of, "I can't do it anymore, Ron." When pressed for a slightly less laconic reason for ending a major interpersonal relationship, she told me, This just isn't working for me." Which is about as tautological a response as one could ever fear to receive. A breakup is, by definition, an indication that things are not working for the party that initiates it. That's what a breakup is. A declaration that the relationship does not or cannot work. But that was the only answer that I ever got. Long, lonely hours scrutinizing her Facebook page, recounting over and over again my mental record of our brief and, to my recollection, uneventful relationship proved fruitless. Yet I found myself thinking about it constantly. I caught my breath in a sharp, sudden inhale when she suddenly came online in Messenger. I felt a bitter pang of remorse when I saw her pictures with other men. Why? What had I done, or not done, or failed to divine? After agonizing over these questions for weeks, I made the decision to move. When I informed Lucy of my decision over text, I saw that she read the message, then remained silent for an hour before finally replying, "Goodbye, Ron." At least in that, there was a note of finality. All of this came to the forefront of my mind in an instant, and then it passed. As I ran my finger over the picture of her smiling face, her nose was slightly wrinkled in the picture, and with time, was becoming more so as the paper itself began to deform. Somehow, it made her that much more beautiful. I looked down at my watch. I was going to be late for my shift. Normally, I was an extremely punctual employee, so it was likely that the first offense would be allowed to slide. But that was a chance that I didn't want to take. I pulled my jacket over my shoulders and I sprinted to the car, nearly dropping my keys as I did so. By some miracle, my driveway did not require shoveling that morning, and so I started the engine and I pulled out onto the road, nearly colliding with a passerby. By way of apology, I raised my hand in that half-hearted way that drivers use as a universal signal of sentiments ranging from thanks to I'm sorry to I'm in a great hurry, please let me into this lane. The gentleman on the receiving end of the gesture was not so understanding and smacked the back of my car as he walked away, muttering caustic curses under his breath. A bit later, I arrived at work. I was not late for my shift. Traffic was mercifully light and the parking was plentiful. Getting up at the crack of dawn in the middle of the Alaskan winter does wonderful things for one's parking opportunities, if little else. The 7-Eleven where I worked saw painfully little business during the best of times, and my duties were mostly restricted to counting and then recounting inventory and mopping the unsullied floors. My life felt, in those moments, like a run-on sentence. Too much unnecessary detail. Most of what I did in any given day would be skipped over in a TV show dramatization of my life, or, at best, hurriedly depicted in a slapdash montage. My manager greeted me with a half-hearted grunt, mimicking my own mood. He handed me a mop and pointed to a spot on the floor which was not quite so immaculate as the rest. I set about rectifying this travesty with pretty much the enthusiasm that it deserved. None. As I did this, my mind flashed back to one of my last nights with Lucy. She was sitting at a table reading something that I don't remember, and I stood above her, awkwardly braiding her hair. About halfway through, she caught my hand and shook her head. "Not like that," she admonished, and looked up at me, smiling in a way that men always dream that women will smile at them. She guided my hands without breaking eye contact, and I was mesmerized. I think it was the happiest I've ever been. Even more so than the first time we had sex. More so than during my graduation from college. A moment that my impoverished family never truly believed would come. And would not have if it had not been for my securing a full-ride scholarship. It was a moment that I wanted to last forever. That moment of connection. But all good things, as they say. How had things gone so wrong, so quickly? The haze of the memory was broken by the harsh ding-dong of the store's motion sensor, announcing the entry of a customer. Quickly, I finished up my mopping and I ran over to the counter. Christina wouldn't be here for another hour to man the register. I smiled at the tall man who entered. He was a black man in his 50s with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes. He smiled back and walked over to the far side of the room, where we keep the magazines. After a few minutes, he shuffled up to the counter and laid a magazine, a pack of donuts, and a map on the counter. I had forgotten that we even sold those. But they were actually a pretty popular item out here. GPS oftentimes doesn't work in this little corner of the world. "Going on a trip?" I asked, desperate for some kind of conversation. "Yep, going fishing," the man said obligingly. "Oh, whereabouts?" I asked. A little lake just north of here, probably gonna be frozen, but I used to go there with my dad when I was a kid. So I go up there once in a while anyway. I don't think I've ever heard of it, I said with a frown. Ha, you're not from around here, huh? The man chuckled. No, I just moved here actually. Really? People usually scrimp and save to move away from here. It's been a long time since I heard of someone moving to here. Yeah, I needed to get away from my old life. As far away as possible, I said with a grimace. You came to the right place for that, he said, accepting the change that I held out to him. Well, if you ever need a place to just go and think. He opened the map and pointed to a spot. Here it is. It's a popular fishing spot in the summer when the water thaws. But in the winter, it's nice and quiet. He indicated that I should take a picture of it, and I did, hastily pulling out my phone and snapping a quick one before my manager could see. Then I nodded to the man and waved as he left. Bill came back out from the storeroom and leveled an unhappy stare at me. I'm paying you to work, not chit-chat. Count the change and move on. I mumbled absently in the affirmative and went back to mopping the floor, though there was even less of a point than there had been before. Much of the morning passed uneventfully. Christina came in slightly late and received a verbal equivalent of the London Blitz for her transgression. These things rolled off her back much more easily than mine, and she winked over Bill's shoulder at me as she nodded gravely to acknowledge his remonstrations. When he had turned around to emphasize a point, she mimed hanging herself and I chuckled quietly. Bill wheeled around, but he wasn't quick enough to catch Christina in the act. He merely cast us both the evil eye and then concluded his lecture, which, when all was said and done, wasted twice as much time as Christina's 5-minute tardiness. Has it been one of those days? She asked. Yeah, he yelled at me for talking to a customer, I sighed. Oh, that's a rookie mistake, she said, patting me on the shoulder. I looked at her strangely, then went back to reconfirming for the 100th time that our inventory was all accounted for, making sure to deduct the pack of donuts, magazine, and map that we had sold this morning. It was our most profitable morning all week. This was a fact that was not likely to escape Bill's notice. I had always wished that I had Christina's aptitude for apathy. Sadly, I even cared about things that I didn't care about. In one of the slower moments of what had been an even less exciting day than usual, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Lucy's Facebook page for the 1000th time. That day, however, something was different. Her relationship status had been changed to in a relationship. I felt ill. A relationship? With who? I scrolled down and I nearly dropped my phone. Christian? She was dating Christian? That frat boy wannabe mouth-breathing waste of oxygen? Christian Johnson hadn't said a single interesting sentence in his entire life. Even his name was boring. He was a walking stereotype, even addressing his male friends as bro and slapping them on the back in a gesture of self-congratulatory camaraderie. I hated every word that came out of his mouth, but I had endured him for Lucy's sake. If it had been anyone else, but Christian. Christina saw my reaction and came over. What's the matter? She said. I tried to smile and pass it off as nothing, but she insisted on knowing, so I explained the whole ugly mess to her. Several times I stopped myself saying some variation of, "You really don't want to hear all of this." But apparently she did. When the long, sad, boring story of my ill-fated romance was done, Christina sat in silence for a moment, then wrapped me in a hug and patted my back. I'm sure you'll find someone who appreciates you, Ron. You're a great guy, she said. But at that moment, nothing seemed further from the truth. The rest of the day passed in a haze, and I barely managed to make it out without doing some kind of irreparable damage to the store in my absent-mindedness. But quitting time eventually came, and I left the store precisely on the hour. Ignoring Bill's various complaints about clock watchers, I dodged Christina's concerned glances and got into my car, which I briefly thought was inoperable due to the cold. But fortunately, it was still functional. Images of Lucy and Christian sprang unbidden to the forefront of my mind. His lips on her neck, her mouth open, her back arching. I swerved violently to avoid hitting the car which had stopped in front of me, and I shook my head, dislodging the vile thoughts. This was becoming intolerable. Then I remembered the stranger's words. "If you ever need a place to just go and think." That was precisely what I needed. I pulled over at the next available opportunity, and I found the picture that I had taken of the location on the map which he had indicated. With some difficulty, I managed to punch it into my phone's GPS, and I worked out a route. The GPS was likely to fail once I got up into the mountains, but as long as I plotted the route there and back while I still had service, I should still be okay. Ideally, I would have a map like my customer had bought, in case I got lost or my phone died, or any one of a million other things happened. But that day, I simply didn't care. The drive was long and boring, but it wasn't difficult. Nobody else wanted to brave the journey into the mountain on a day like that. I felt a tingle of fear as I saw the last gas station recede into the distance as I drove onto the long, narrow mountain road. At last, after a long time driving into the wilderness, I arrived at the lake. It was indeed frozen. The man from earlier was still there, and he smiled when he saw me and waved me over. I parked and walked over to him, slightly awkward and not sure of what to say. "I didn't expect to see you here so soon," he told me. "Neither did I said. "But it's been a long day." The man looked at me, and it was the first time in quite a while that I had seen genuine interest on someone's face during a conversation. "What happened?" he asked. And for some reason, I told him. I told him everything. He listened and nodded at the appropriate points in the story. When I finished, he looked at me as if trying to figure something out. "Come with me," he said, and started walking. I followed. It was a short walk. He took me off to the side of the lake and into a cave. There was a point not too deep into the darkness which was illuminated by the dimming sunlight which streamed through an opening in the roof. He stopped just at the edge of the light and indicated that I should do the same. I obeyed. "Look," he said simply and pointed downwards. I turned my gaze there and gasped slightly. Beneath a sheet of translucent ice, perfectly lit by the sunlight, was a woman. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She had flowing dark hair and severe blue eyes. She was tall, but not so much as to be intimidating or imposing. Her proportions were perfect, and there was no discernible imperfections in her skin's alabaster surface. In every possible way, she was perfect. I turned to ask my companion who this was, but he was gone. He wasn't in the cave, nor out on the lake. He simply disappeared. To this day, I have no idea who he was or where he went. It's difficult to say how long I spent sitting in that cave afterwards. Certainly, it was a length of time measured in hours, not minutes. But how many, I don't know. I merely stared at the woman in the ice, absorbing her beauty, etching every detail of her face and body into my mind's eye. Finally, the sun set, and I could no longer make out anything more specific than her outline, no matter how hard I strained my eyes. So, reluctantly, I made my way back to the car and began the long drive home. I couldn't sleep much that night. The image of the woman in the ice would not leave my mind's eye. Every time that I closed my eyes, I saw her. Sometime after 3 o'clock, I surrendered to sleep and dreamed of her. The next morning, my phone woke me up again, and I hit the snooze alarm several times before acquiescing and dragging myself out of bed. 4 hours of sleep is technically enough to function, but it felt like I hadn't slept at all. My body ached and my mind was so heavy. A terrible mist pressed down on my thoughts and I felt like my blood had turned to molasses. Because I had forgotten to buy more milk the previous day, breakfast was once again dry cereal. I didn't mind much though. My mind was occupied with the events of yesterday. Lucy and Christian, the woman in the ice, the mysterious stranger. So much in just 24 hours. Nothing had changed in my life for so long that I was afraid of getting whiplash. I went back to the store. Bill was waiting and tapping his watch, apparently making some point about how annoying it is to be a clock watcher. Frankly, the tapping wasn't what I found annoying. It was having to listen to him talk. But I kept that particular observation to myself. After he was done berating me, he handed me the mop once more, and I set about doing the task that he continued to insist was necessary, despite there being no empirical evidence to support that claim. It came as a great relief when Christina walked through the door and drew Bill's attention away for a few minutes. She walked over to me and offered to take over and allow me to man the register, which would have essentially been an early lunch break since no one was likely to come in anytime soon. I refused. I wasn't good for much. But if I could save Christina from having to pointlessly mop the floor, that day would have not been a total waste. As I worked, I thought of the woman in the ice. Who had she been? How did she end up there? Her clothing suggested that she was at least from the modern era. She was somebody that I could have run into in a store somewhere, or passed in the mall, or futilely fantasized about at the gym. Women often think that men have these elaborate, lurid sexual fantasies, born of minds which are the jaded products of years of pornographic consumption. This had never been the case for me. My sexual fantasies had inevitably been pathetic, short-lived dreams which collapsed under any amount of scrutiny. Imagining the hot girl in yoga pants running on the treadmill in front of me pulling me onto her bed usually devolved into a spiral of self-loathing. Quickly I would ask myself, do you really think that could actually happen? Or, why are you torturing yourself like this? And so on and so on. This process hardly ever gave me any real pleasure. But these fantasies about the woman in the ice didn't have the same depressing effect. I don't know why, but I instinctually felt that my daydreams about her were not so pointless. On the contrary, thinking about her, trying to imagine who she might have been, made me very happy. "Ron!" Christina snapped her fingers in front of me. I started and almost fell over. What? I asked when I had steadied myself. "Let me mop. Come on, you need a break." I'm good, Christina. It's okay," I said. She shook her head and walked back over to the counter. She meant well, and I knew that she actually wanted to help me. But that day, I didn't mind mopping. At the end of the day, I went to fill my car's gas tank. Then I began to drive back out to the lake. I had to see the woman again. It was the only thing that had actually made me happy since the breakup. That realization was unnerving. I genuinely had not been happy since Lucy had broken up with me. I'd experienced satisfaction from resting after a long day, or the base sensation of satiation that accompanies eating or drinking. But I hadn't been happy. Maybe since that day that Lucy had taught me to braid her hair. That was until I saw the woman in the ice. She gave me that feeling of connection again. I remember hearing about a study done on young monkeys where they were deprived from physical touch for the first few months of their life to see what would happen. It totally ruined them. They never developed the proper social skills. Then they ran a series of experiments where they created a mother out of wire and a bottle, and one that was covered in cloth, which was warm and comforting. The monkeys inevitably clung to the mother, which gave them physical comfort, not the one that fed them. Aside from having always found this experiment to be needlessly cruel, I had also thought that it was stupid. Only an egghead psychology professor would think to ask the question, is physical touch actually important to psychological health? Of course we need physical intimacy. When I arrived at the lake, I realized that I would not have much time to spend there before the sun went down. I would have to remember to bring a flashlight with me next time. I got out of the car and I made my way over to the cave. Then I sat down in front of the woman in the ice. After a few minutes, I produced a sandwich from my bag and I began to chew pensively. It's funny what you notice when you look closely. The things that we miss upon the usual cursory inspection. Last time it seemed like the woman's skin was totally flawless. But that day I was able to make out a scar on the right side of her chest. What had given it to her, I wondered. An abusive father? A childhood sports injury? There were a million possible reasons. She was so beautiful. I was completely in awe of her. This was not a totally novel feeling for me. I had been in love before, but to have it happen so quickly and completely was frankly frightening. My hand rested lightly on the ice. I was afraid that it would break if I applied too much pressure, but it was frozen solid, and I realized that I was pressing against a very thick layer of the material. She must have been at least 50 feet down, and my palm was as far from her as it could get. But still, it felt like we were connected, that we were touching. It was so refreshing to see something beautiful in this wasteland to which I had banished myself. My life had been so gray and lifeless and dull for so long. It was like finally seeing color again. A tear slid down my cheek and froze as it hit the ground. Even in my thick layers, I shivered slightly as the wind picked up. An image of my body pressed against the woman's flickered through my mind. Her smile, my fingers in her hair, her hand on my arm. I smiled and closed my eyes, allowing the images to come. They were a welcome change. For the next week, I could hardly focus on my work. I thought of the woman in the ice continually. Her eyes so blue, so strong. Her soft, stern face at once commanding and so promising. Many times, Christina had to poke me to get my attention and avoid Bill's wrath at my unresponsiveness. She seemed more worried about me than she had the day before. To be fair, I had been acting very odd, and I had already spilled my guts to her about Lucy, so she had no choice but to assume that she was the cause. I brushed off her inquiries, managing at least to convince her that I wasn't on drugs or dangerously depressed, that I was merely sleep-deprived. One night, I brought a lamp with me to see the woman in the ice. It allowed me to stay much later than I had been staying, keeping my strange vigil. I began to talk to her, to tell her my story, and not just about Lucy. I told her about my childhood, about the time that I had broken my arm playing football on the playground, what my favorite color was, it's purple by the way, how I like my steaks. In short, I told her everything. It was a strange exercise, but no more so than that of people who speak to deceased loved ones at their graveside, I reasoned. I tried pressing my lips against the ice that night. and I felt a bizarre sense of satisfaction. Obviously, we had not actually kissed, but it felt more satisfying than my last kiss with Lucy. More than most of my kisses with her, in fact. "I love you," I whispered to the woman. It may have been a trick of the light, but I could have sworn that her lips moved slightly in a motion which may have indicated her saying, "Me too." I hardly slept that night because of how late I had stayed at the lake. The effort required to force myself out of bed was becoming Herculean, but I managed it. Bill was beginning to notice the change in my demeanor. "Man, you look terrible, Ron," he said, and it almost sounded like he was concerned. "Good morning to you too, Bill," I said sarcastically. "Just don't pass out on me, okay?" I nodded. That morning, I had checked my Facebook feed and saw a video of Lucy and Christian kissing for an obscene length of time. It was like she was intentionally mocking me. I mean, I assumed that she and her boyfriend were kissing, but actually seeing it was somehow much worse. My stomach felt like it had just been the target of some serious physical violence, and I had that awful sick feeling that often accompanies emotional pain. Christina noticed and put a hand on my back by way of comfort. "Are you okay?" she asked me and looked at me with genuine concern and perhaps more. I saw something in her eyes, something that I hadn't seen in any woman's face since Lucy. Was it desire? You have to understand that by that point I had been operating on 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night for over a week straight. I was actually surprised that I was still on my feet. So, when I saw that look in Christina's eyes, it was too much. I leaned in for a kiss. She pulled back, shocked. "Ron, I have a boyfriend. I thought you knew," she said. My head spun. A boyfriend. Of course she did. How could I have been so stupid? Women don't just throw themselves at men like me. They never have and they never will. "I'm so sorry, Christina. I just..." The look in her eyes said it all. I turned and I ran out of the store, not waiting for her reply. She called after me, "Ron, wait!" But I didn't wait. I drove off into the distance. I had something that I needed to do. After a few quick stops, I made my way back to the lake, back to the woman in the cave. I had never been there so early, and the view was truly breathtaking. All of the parts of her body, normally hidden or partially obscured by the shadows, were revealed under the full power of the daylight. Her beauty, usually breathtaking, was now positively angelic. And that's where I am now, writing this record. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. I practically know that no one will ever hear this, but I don't care. I needed to get this down. I need to explain to myself why I am doing what I'm doing. After Christina turned me down, I was ashamed. Not because I'm pathetic. Not because yet another woman rejected me. No, not that. That I'm used to. It's because I realized that there's only one woman for me. The woman in the ice. She and I were meant for each other. We're two halves of a single soul, separated long ago. My darling, finally I'm here, my darling. I've come for you. This angel in the ice, she completes me. In the words of Poe, we loved with a love that was more than love. And in that spirit, I leave behind a poem. I've already broken through the ice with a pickaxe that I picked up on my way here. I'm ready to be reunited with her, with my darling. Here it is, my poem, The Woman in the Ice. I want her, this woman with no name, to be remembered. She deserves so much more. She deserves statues and parades in her honor. But I can't give her that. The best that I can do is entomb her in these words. This literary mausoleum. May heaven forgive me. It's the best that I can do. At the frozen lake's most perilous place, I looked into the depths of ice, saw a woman's frost-bitten face, and paid a just and equitable price. She retained perfect integrity, and every detail still remained. In this maiden's beautiful antiquity, not a single crack or strain. Every day I would come after sunrise to scrutinize her piercing eyes. And time, it flies away from her piercing eyes, so that hours pass by without a thought. Time spent divining her history, futilely maligning her mystery, until I abandoned the answer I sought. Yet still I came every sunrise, still came to those piercing, guileless eyes, still dreamed of a future, with us bonded by suture. This woman, this fallen angel, far suppressed her earthly counterparts, none of whom were close to able to mimic her beauty. She stood apart. Weeks and weeks upon, I visited this fallen angel and pressed my hand against the ice, but she did not stir from out of her cradle, did not rise from her vice of ice. Soon she entered my dreams, heralded by shining moonbeams, and would not leave my thoughts until my entire psyche was tied in hopeless knots. So back and back I came, back to the woman in the ice. I could not avoid the price of the woman for whom I had no name. We could never be together when separated by the veil. Apart we would remain forever, and our souls of each other could not avail. So I set out on the ice, once more looking into those piercing eyes. I set out to pay the price. I told myself no lies. To reach her and save that fallen angel, I had to join her in the deep. I smashed the hated veil and swam down the blackness, swam to the dreamless sleep. I died there in her arms, the woman in the ice. I died cradling her frozen statue. Yes, I gladly paid that price. So if you ever think you see us embracing in the depths, spare me no pity, for in dying I was finally happy. I died no lonely death.